Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. I know we're celebrating 200 million shots today, but there's some indications that, at the very least, the rates aren't raising at the same rate as they have been previously in the administration.
The rates of vaccination, or sorry, just clarify what you mean.
It's being put in arms, and my question is whether you guys see that as just sort of the inevitable blip from J&J coming out of circulation, if it's hitting a wall with, we're now moving towards folks who might be more hesitant to get the vaccine versus folks who already have, if it's just sort of blips in the data, or if you don't, basically if you don't think that the last few days have been representative of a broader trend. And more broadly, I know that you, or the president's planning to announce this tax break going into effect, but are there other things that you can talk about the administration doing to address hesitancy, since it now seems to be squarely pivoting away from folks who are eager to get the vaccine and towards folks who are not?
Well, first I would say, and you asked a few questions there, so let me see if I can answer all of them. What we've seen, and there was some interesting data that came out over the last couple of days, obviously a lot was happening yesterday, is that we've actually seen a decrease in hesitancy, an increase in confidence among many communities. So in some polling that was put out just yesterday, 40% of respondents said they were more likely to get the COVID-19 vaccine than they were a month ago. In terms of conservatives' confidence in vaccine, again, this is a poll, so it's not perfect, but it was interesting data. A full 71% of Trump voters said they have either received at least one dose of a vaccine or definitely or probably will, up from 59% in an earlier poll conducted just 1 month ago. So what we're trying to address, to answer another one of your questions, is what we see as the issues, the barriers to getting the majority of the American people vaccinated. And one of those barriers is access. And so what the announcement today is intended to do is address one of those barriers to access, which is people of not through a political prism, but many people who have not yet been vaccinated are concerned they can't take a day off of work. They don't have additional paid leave. And so we're trying to address that barrier, reduce that barrier as one that is preventing access. I will say that the reason we're at this point, where we are getting to a point which we always knew we would reach, where we have greater supply, we will at a point get to a point where we have greater supply than we have demand, is because only in some regions of the country, I should say, as you know, not everywhere, is because we work quickly to increase supply and provide thousands of easy and convenient locations for people to get vaccinated. So, in the last few weeks, we've sent out more than 115 million doses. But what we're trying to do now is address what we see as the barrier. So I mentioned that the tax cut, of course, trying to help businesses. We're providing technical assistance to states. Again, we're relying on local voices and local doctors to provide the best information, which every set of data we've seen, and even from some news organizations, show that those are the most trusted messengers. We've allocated $3 billion for states. We're ramping up targeted media efforts. We're also, along with the CDC, we're working to help states expand vaccine distribution to primary care physicians, where many people are very much trusted local doctors. So, yes, we will continue to assess and look for ways to increase access and get it out to more communities.
And both the Washington Post and the New York Times last night had pretty detailed reports about the refugee issue. They suggested that the president himself overruled national security experts on his team and Secretary of State Blinken. You've sort of maintained that there was never a policy change at all, but is it fair to say at this point that the president changed his mind from the 62,500 number and then changed his mind again once he saw the sort of outrage and blowback from Democrats and refugee groups?
Well, I can say that we have every intention of putting out an increased cap, and we hope to do that soon, in advance of May 15th. I'm obviously not going to get into private conversations between the president and members of his national security team, but I will say that one of the things that has been on the president's mind that I think was covered in a number of those stories are the challenges and the challenges to our resources. And we've talked about this a little bit. So one of those is refugee processing in a big global system. And there were muscles that have been atrophied over the last few years. It's not just the federal government. It is also a lot of important organizations around the world that help address this. And his concern was, in part, is that system prepared? Now, by setting a larger cap, which we have every intention of doing, we are sending a message. get your muscles back in action so that we can welcome more refugees and continue to strive toward the goal that he has always maintained of 125,000 refugees for next year. Our policy has not changed on that front. We've always wanted to reach 125. It's just a matter of what we think we can get to this year.
Well, the State Department is in charge of processing refugees.
Mm-hmm.
If the Secretary of State is encouraging the President to sign the paperwork to raise the cap, that would suggest that he feels that the State Department, despite whatever apathy may have happened, could have raised that limit, and that the President, because of perhaps, worries about if HHS could support the refugees when they got here, perhaps because of political calculations, overruled the Secretary of State. And so I'm asking if you can explain why, if the State Department says that they can do this, the President didn't think that they could.
Well, first of all, it's setting a cap, right? It doesn't answer the question of whether we can reach that. This is an important point of whether we can reach that point.
To get into this, right? Because there's no reason that the President couldn't have done what he said he was going to do, raise the cap to 62,500, and then if the State Department or HHS determined that they couldn't, process the refugees, just not hit that number. As you said yesterday or 2 days ago, that happens all the time. So
Sure.
this just sort of
And he has
underscores
every intention of raising the cap. The Friday announcement was not about the top level of the cap. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand. But I'd also say, as you alluded to in your question, the State Department, yes, they do the they do the vetting, which is an important part of the process and can take months. And there are a low number of refugees that are currently through a security vetting process, despite numbers that have been put out there and in reporting which are inaccurate. There's a low number.
Hundreds of people that have already been.
What'd you say?
It's not hundreds of people that have already been approved by the State Department. I think the reports are something like 700 people have had to cancel flights because of.
And the flights have resumed. The flights have resumed as of Friday. But there's also another component of this because it's an interagency process that addresses refugees resettlement, right? ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is not a part of the State Department, has a component of this as well. It's a part of HHS. The President looks at all of the government, all of our resources available, what he thinks the capacity is, but he also is looking for assessments from the interagency team on what's possible. That's what his questions were. Hence, we'll have more to say when we have a conclusion on that.
I think we're talking past each other, so I'll just ask once more and then we
Okay.
can move on if you don't want to. But the question is whether the President changed his policy on the 6,500 and if on Friday you intended it to be 15,000 and then changed the decision after the outcry.
Well, his policy was on Friday, was months before, continues to be to reach 125,000 refugees in next fiscal year. 62.5 was a down payment. It will be slower this year than it will be next year. The President wants an assessment of how far we can get. That's what he's looking for. The State Department has a component of that. HHS is a component of that. We're going to look at all of that. And the refugee cap, and the point I've been trying to make, which I know you don't love, but that's okay, but to others, is that the cap is something that is not typically reached. We wanted to send a clear message. We are a country that is welcoming refugees. We recognize that that is not the message that was sent. And so we reassessed, but it's not a change in policy. It's just making sure we're sending a clear message to the world about who we are. America's back. We're welcoming refugees. We need to get our muscles back working again, and we'll have an updated cap hopefully soon.